Just getting started here or joining, I'm about to go live on our very last stream for this entire year for 2021. And, it definitely has been different from what I expected. And we'll find out how it was from yours. Every Monday night at 9 p.m. Central Time, I actually do a Twitter Spaces, which is completely open. And I have people come on and tell me, what they thought of that week's big news stories, specifically around policy and political change in our country. And, I asked the same question to many people, what their expectations were this last Monday and, how they have handled what they expected versus what they actually experienced. So, with that, let's review what all happened in 2021. And a lot of things happened. This seemed like one of the longest years that we've lived through, because definitely it started off in a very, very interesting way, difficult way, and unfortunately it may be ending in a difficult way too. So we'll see what happens. Let's go through the key things that happened in 2021. So remember, I've been doing this stream, I think sometime in late July we started. I announced my campaign on June 28th, saying that I would run in what we believe to be a newly created district in Austin, Texas. And that became a reality sometime later in the year and was signed into law in October of 2021. And so those of you who might be tuning into this very first time, my name is Donna, Imam. I'm running for U.S. Congress in the brand new district here in Austin, Texas. Texas's 37th district. Our early voting is now just away 6 weeks. That's when it starts, February 14th, early voting start. This is a Democratic leaning district, so the race will be decided in the primary. So if you haven't caught up to Texas races, Texas primaries happen pretty early in the year. Almost majority of the people in Texas vote during early voting. And so, it'll be all over by March 1st. So that's kind of what's going on for our campaign. Tomorrow, the 31st, is our last day and our very first end of year and only end of year fundraising deadline for this entire race. So if you have been thinking, hey, I want to make a contribution to Donna's campaign, it would be really appreciated if it came before tomorrow, midnight Eastern time. So let's go through what happened in 2021. 2021 started off really exciting, especially for Democrats, because we had these two Senate races in Georgia that would basically hand Democrats Senate control. And almost all Democrats across the country became extremely mobilized around ensuring that happened, because we wanted to see things happen, progress happen. We wanted to see good policy passed, and we definitely wanted to see a quick end to this pandemic. So it started off with the wins of Warnock and Ossoff in Georgia. Georgia literally turned blue in front of our eyes, and it was an extremely exciting time in early January. But on the very same day that these results appeared, we were met with these pictures, which looked like a war zone at the Capitol. And what's sad about these pictures is that regardless of who you support, whether you're a Republican or a Trump supporter or vote for GOP members, if you look back at the last 4 years, we still haven't solved, from a Republican voter standpoint, there has been no solution to a better healthcare plan for Americans across this country. That did not happen in the 4 years that President Trump was in office. Student loan debt did not go away. In fact, it got bigger. It went from 1.5 trillion to 1.8 trillion towards the end of 2021. Education didn't become less expensive. In fact, the cost of education continues to increase to a point where it is unachievable for many, many families to be able to send the young generation, their kids, to college, and not even just college, community college, to take training classes, to be able to do skilled work of any kind. None of that has changed because of these 4 years. Although But yet, on January 6th, this is what we saw because we had a president that would not basically face the fate of his second campaign that Americans had dealt him. And even though these images are extremely difficult to actually fathom that they actually happened, after all of this, we had many US House members that voted to overturn the election results. So a lot of us have forgotten that. It's December now. But regardless of what happened, the fact that nothing got accomplished with respect to the biggest problems that we are facing right now, there were still people that voted, that were elected into Congress, that are in the House of Representatives today, that voted against what really happened and what the American people wanted and how they voted for president in this country. So that's what happened on January 6th, and a lot of January was, people just were stunned at what happened on January 6th after that. Then by March, President Biden signed into law the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. Now, a lot of this had been put together back in 2020, but it never passed. And a majority of this money actually went to states. It did not go to individuals, even though this was the impetus. The $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan was the reason why Americans saw stimulus checks early on. So Democrats and Republicans and people across this country were really looking forward to a second stimulus check, because of so many people who had lost jobs in 2020, had been displaced from their jobs because of just what happened with respect to the pandemic and not being able to address the pandemic in the way that we had hoped. So in March, Americans started receiving the $1,400 stimulus checks. Now, remember I talked about Ossoff and Warnock winning? One of the big messages of that campaign was, if you put Ossoff and Warnock into these Senate seats, we would be able to get $2,000 stimulus checks. And of course, the $2,000 from President Biden's perspective was in addition to the $600 that was issued to the American people under President Trump. So instead of people seeing $2,000 checks, people saw $1,400 checks. And we saw a lot of dismay among Democrats specifically, who worked very hard in Georgia to be able to get Ossoff and Warnock elected. A lot of dismay around the $1,400 checks versus the actual $2,000 checks, which was part of the messaging. All of 2020, we saw all 50 states come together and stand up against police brutality. And the reason for all of this was the murder of George Floyd. And so in April, we saw Derek Chauvin, who was one of the police officers that had his knee on George Floyd's neck, which was an extremely difficult video for all of us across this country to watch. He was convicted in the murder of George Floyd, and that really was a way for the country to say, it is time for us to really look at how policing is done in the United States. And so there was a lot of discussion with respect to doing things like repealing qualified immunity. And I've gone over qualified immunity in quite in depth in the way that law enforcement officers have immunity from being able to be properly prosecuted unless there is a prior case that is identical to the case that they are being prosecuted for in the future. And that creates a situation where people cannot actually have success in holding police officer accountable. So there were lots of talks about police reform, and Tim Scott, who is a GOP senator, came together with Senator Cory Booker, who is a Democratic senator, among others, by the way, in the Senate and in the House, to try to negotiate a police reform bill. And of course, one of the big things that was really important to this, repealing qualified immunity, was removed, and eventually the talks broke apart and nothing was passed in 2021. And that's one of the things to take away, that the entire country didn't come together and they did not walk, in protest of police brutality for one case. This was about greater transformation in the way that policing is done in this country. And this should have been a big force to really transform our country in a way that we would stop seeing the type of brutality that we saw with the George Floyd case specifically. But in all of 2021, that did not happen, and we did not successfully pass a law that addressed these challenges. And I think that's one of the things that was very disappointing to many Americans, across this country. Now, between April, May, June, there was lots of conversation and lots of negotiation over many different bills, but one of them was the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. This was, it had basically $550 billion of brand new spending, but it actually used a lot of the money that was not used in the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. So a lot of this, a little over half was brand new money, but a whole bunch of it was actually money that was part of the American Rescue Bill. That got passed in the Senate, and after it went to the House, it became a sticking point and started the battle between Build Back Better. And, I have talked so much about Build Back Better. And so the House passed this Build Back Better bill, and it was talked about as a social safety net and climate bill, and it went to the Senate, right? So the House eventually held up the bipartisan infrastructure bill for a long time, using it as a way to ensure that the Senate would pass the Build Back Better. But unfortunately, at the end of it all, even after the House passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill without any kind of negotiation or changes in the House, they signed on the dotted line of the infrastructure bill without negotiating any of the items inside the infrastructure bill. So there was no room for improvement that House Democrats took on themselves to actually alter that to make it better for the American people. It eventually passed as is in the House and went to the Senate. So you can see here the Build Back Better went to the Senate, and this happened in November. And to jog your memory, not that I have to because I've been covering this pretty much almost every week since we've been discussing Build Back Better, before it went to the Senate, the Build Back Better bill was severely gutted in the House by House Democrats. And some of the most popular things in the Build Back Better bill did not get through committee. Off point here, there are lots of things in red, but one of the most important things was the expansion of Medicare and lowering prescription drug costs, which is one of the most popular things specifically among seniors 65 and plus. None of that made it in the Build Back Better bill, which was passed by House Democrats in the House and sent to the Senate without these items in there. Paid leave on a teetering edge of going nowhere, and of course tuition-free community college was completely gutted from this bill. One of the best return on investments that we could have done as a country for our next generation. These are not items that we have to depend on the Senate to decide if they're in or out. These items were gutted from the bill in the House before they even made it to the Senate. Some of the most important things that we needed to accomplish as Democrats, that Democrats across this country ran on, promising to get done. Remember, we pay 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 times more than prescription drugs, the exact same drug that is sold in other parts of the world. Even though we grossly subsidize a lot of the development, the research and development of these drugs. So you can see here that one of the biggest things here was taken out, and this was the tragedy of Build Back Better. And the tragedy started when it started getting gutted in the House due to, many representatives in the House that may be more conservative or moderate Democrats in the House. They're the ones who put up a fight, and a lot of this was gutted. But the year didn't go by without Texas being in the national limelight, on the national headlines over and over and over again. Texas held multiple special legislative sessions this year in 2021. It started off with the House Democrats fleeing Texas, breaking quorum as a way to protest voter suppression, restrictions on being able to vote in a state which is already one of the most hardest states to vote in. But nothing came about it because Texas Democrats had to return to Texas from Washington, D.C. after Washington, D.C. was not convinced that they would remove the filibuster. And even if they did, they don't have the votes to pass a bill because of Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema. At least that's what we heard over and over and over again throughout the year. So the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, signed this horrible voting bill into law, overcoming the Democratic quorum breaks that were as an attempt to try to prevent that from happening. And you would have thought, well, maybe, that's how bad it can get, but not with Texas. Because this year in Texas, Governor Abbott is up for re-election. And he is being primaried from the extreme right by two major names, well-known names in Texas politics. And so there was no end to what Texans saw, the siege upon Texans, one after the other. The Texas Heartbeat Law was passed, and it turned citizens into bounty hunters, putting $10,000 bounty on the heads of people seeking reproductive health care in Texas, literally banning reproductive health care in Texas. And that's what we saw in 2021, as if voter suppression laws passed wasn't enough. But that wasn't all. At the same time, we saw scenes like this in Afghanistan. Scenes where the United States was exiting and there was no good plan or way to be able to evacuate those in Afghanistan that had been helping the United States for decades. One of the longest wars that we have been part of for as many years as most of us can actually even remember. And of course, for many young people, their entire lives. So this was one of the most iconic photographs or videos that we saw over and over again. And of course, we also saw this photograph with the parents handing over the baby over the wall of the airport in Kabul. And of course, we lost U.S. service members in this ordeal as well. And so this was part of 2021, the tragic part of 2021, as if it couldn't get worse and worse. Now I bring you back to Texas. So Texas passed some of the most stringent voter restrictive laws, voter suppression laws, restricting the ability to vote, to help others to vote. And then, of course, reproductive rights were completely taken away from us. And then we saw gerrymandering to the extreme. New political maps. 95% of the growth of population in Texas was by Hispanic Americans, Black Americans, and Asian Americans. Yet the political maps reflected something quite different, adding 2 new congressional districts to Texas, creating a sync district right here in Austin, Texas, which is literally the only good thing about extreme gerrymandering is that Austin, Texas, for the first time in decades, has the opportunity to send brand new representation and a Democrat to represent them that will actually go to Congress and advocate for passing legislation that Democrats have been running on for decades, providing a pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients, for Dreamers, for TPS, really lifting the wage up to a thriving wage because you can't live on $15 an hour, giving Americans the ability to save so they can put a down payment on a home and actually retire someday. That's the kind of person that Austin has an opportunity to send to Congress for the very first time in many, many, many years. That is the only good thing, really, out of all of this extreme gerrymandering that happened in Texas, diluting the voices of voters that had the biggest growth in terms of Texas, making it one of the most diverse states in the entire union. Now, there wasn't a lot of, spotlight on the Pandora Papers, but we learned from the Pandora Papers how the ultra wealthy hide their wealth and how they can get away without paying any taxes. We also saw multiple ProPublica stories that brought to light that people that were the wealthiest in this country, like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, in certain years paid absolutely no taxes. And so many people asked, how is that possible? How is it possible for a billionaire, not just a billionaire, but 100 billionaire, a 200 billionaire to not pay any taxes? And the simple truth is this, that billionaires don't have income. So they take loans against their massive portfolio of stock that they own. And they're able to take those loans at almost 0%, at a very, very low interest rate, and not have to actually take an income to fund their lavish lifestyles. And then they are able to transfer all of their wealth to their heirs when they pass away at a stepped up tax basis, thus not having to pay any taxes on the increase in the value of their wealth throughout their entire life. And ProPublica did multiple great articles on this. If you haven't seen those, I highly encourage you to check them out. The best parts of 2021 was working people, especially union workers, that rose up and said enough is enough. We are tired of work schedules that are 7 days in a row, that are back to back, shift after shift without being able to take a break, spend time with family, or even just be able to go home. And we saw this across the country. The John Deere workers eventually were able to get the raises that they asked for, 10% immediately, ending their month-long strike for more than 10,000 employees. John Deere had profits, healthy profits in the billions of dollars, while not paying their workers enough to be able to just live their life. Forget about a thriving wage. Just being able to survive was a challenge. So we did see a really positive conclusion to this, pushing home this idea that unions work and we still need them today in 2021. We also saw the Kellogg strike. And this came as a very positive conclusion too. But I pointed out in my last stream that even though Kellogg's had a positive conclusion, one of the big things in here, the two-tier, part of their negotiation was actually left in place. And the thing I wanted to point out is that many of us see good conclusions and we go away happy, especially when we see conclusions like this. But often the circumstances that many people find themselves because they're not fully negotiated to the advantage of all workers, meaning part of this two-tier system in Kellogg's was left in. So some people went home still living a completely different reality than what we are, in the general population are aware of. And so that's something to keep in mind, that workers in the United States still have a long, long way to go. We ended this year on a really troubling trajectory. All of a sudden, we found that we haven't been using all the tools that we should be using. So not just vaccines, but ensuring that we have testing capability so that people can quarantine while they're infected. The fact that we don't have enough therapeutics, early treatments, and just being able to keep yourself well while you have the coronavirus, how to take care of yourself. All these tools were not being used in its full capacity like we should have. And we found shortages of testing all across the country as Delta somewhat subsided and Omicron kicked up. And we end the year today, and this is December 29th, setting a new record for the highest number of COVID-19 cases per day. At the end of 2021, this is not where most of us, if not all of us, imagined we would be. In fact, back in early 2021, the majority of us, if not all of us, were hopeful that we would beat the pandemic by the end of summer, that the availability of vaccines would help us beat this pandemic. But in addition to that, there would be plenty of therapeutics available for those that did suffer or had breakthrough cases, that we would have plenty of testing available, that contact tracing would be in place, that we would ensure that we were using every single tool. Now, at the end of 2021, we find ourselves at a spot where it feels like the beginning of 2021. So with that, I want to wish you a happy 2022. I want to make sure that our 2022 is bigger, it's brighter. We obviously have a lot of work to do. My hopes for 2022 are simple. I want to see tuition-free community college. I want to see healthcare coverage for every single person in this country. I want you to know that we are overpaying for healthcare by over $2 trillion while leaving out almost 100 million Americans from actual ability to go see a doctor when they get sick. We still have a lot of work to do. We must bring down the cost of education, not just forgive student loan debt, because that won't be enough for our future generations. We have to work for it. We have to send people to Congress that will build consensus, bring the entire Congress together to deliver on solutions without pointing fingers and making excuses for the American people. It is not enough just to go to Congress and fight. It is not enough just to go to Congress and co-sponsor bills. We have to build consensus. We have to get bills passed, and we must deliver healthcare coverage while lowering the cost of healthcare and scaling it so that we have more nurses, more doctors, more providers, more facilities in rural parts of our country so that everybody has high quality healthcare coverage. Everybody who wants to get education beyond high school has the ability to do that, whether that be certifications, whether that be trade school, whether that be a 6-week class to gain some skills and gain a higher wage job, or whether that be 2-year degree or a 4-year degree or a graduate school degree. We can make that happen. We must lower the cost of education and healthcare and eliminate the student loan burden because it was set up originally as a scam. So with that, I want to conclude today's very last, live stream here. I hope those of you who have been regularly watching this live stream from me have gone away with more information, more data that you can use, and hopefully convince those around you of what our problems are. But not only that, because I think we all recognize our problems, but that we have actual executable, really amazing solutions that we must take to Congress and that we must enact. And with that, I want to wish you a wonderful, happy new year. Remember, our election is just 6 weeks away. Early voting starts February 14th. And if we win the Democratic nomination like we did last time in 2020, we win the seat. So if you're in Austin, Texas watching this, tell somebody that Donna Imam is running in Austin, Texas, in this brand new district where Austin has an opportunity to send new representation, new skills to Congress to ensure that we deliver on solutions. And with that, I want to thank you. And I hope you have a wonderful end of the year, and I hope you get to enjoy the beginning of this year, and I hope that all of us have a much better 2022